Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes here. So as you're joining, start thinking about, all things productivity. And I don't necessarily mean those favorite productivity hacks of yours that'll, help you clean more efficiently around your home or things like that, but more so about as it relates to work and actually start thinking about your own business's productivity because we may or may not be launching a poll question later that will be tackling just that. So hang tight for a couple minutes and we will get started shortly. Actually, Perry, James, Lisa, now that I've mentioned productivity hacks, do you have any like ridiculous ones that you've seen out in the wild that you're just like, I couldn't possibly imagine doing that?
Oh, wow. I can only think of things that work, like Pomodoro techniques and stuff like that.
I will
Yeah.
say I had a transformational moment with Pomodoro where I was like, yeah, this is
hmm
fantastic.
hmm
Yeah. The one thing that kind of just writing down at the start of the day, the one thing that would
Yeah,
make it a day to like solve. And
yeah,
that's really
yeah,
powerful because it's hard. Hard to
yeah.
stay on one
Like
thing.
your daily bee hack, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, what
Yeah.
about you, Lisa?
Oh, I just feel like I kind of keep it old school still with note taking. Day ahead note taking is a fave for me.
Mm.
Yeah, 100%. I'm trying to remember. I feel like I've seen some just truly like almost absurd. I do like the Pomodoro as in like I feel like it's almost like being in like it's like it's 20 minutes on of just like
Mm.
dedicated work to like get through your list as much as possible. And then a little bit of a break. I feel like I maybe celebrate the little break like too much. I'm just like, oh, yes, like
Yeah. I like
uh,
blocking out time. It's similar. It's a similar,
Mm.
concept, but if it's in my
Mm.
calendar, I know it's happening.
hmm Yeah.
so-
We're a fully remote team, so we do a daily check-in on Slack and we put in a little acronym called ART, Achievements, Reflections, and Today. So we talk about what we're proud of, what we've been thinking about, and what we're up to today. And that helps us a lot.
Oh, I
Excellent.
love that. I think that's a nice little check-in.
ART.
Similarly on
hmm
Yeah.
our team, we do a weekly kind of like weekly download, and it's like a win and a
Mm.
learning. It's a little bit
Nice.
more on a week schedule, but it's really
Mm.
great to see the engagement with kind of one, people thinking about what they're going to put in that for the week, but then also it
Yeah.
just gets more cross-functional
Mm.
collaboration of people being
Mm.
like, oh,
Yeah.
how do I pick that into my area?
Mm. Yeah.
But it seems like we've had a bunch of folks join, so I think we should kick
Yay.
off with today's webinar, Work That Works: Unlocking Productivity in 2025. Um, and I am going to introduce myself as well as our distinguished panel of speakers here today. So my name is John Carroll. I'm the head of marketing for the UK here at Employment Hero. And I'm joined by Lisa Cowie, who's our insights lead, James Potton, who's a co-founder of Ray 10 AI, and then Perry Timms, who is a Employment Hero partner and also the chief energy officer and founder of People and Transformational HR. So with that, I actually want to turn it over to the three of you to tell us a little bit more about yourselves.
Hi,
Lisa?
so I'm Lisa. I lead insights at Employment Hero for the UK, and I do all things thought leadership, including this piece, which has been taking up a good few months of my time. So I'm excited to talk through that today. And kind of at the forefront and thinking about workplace trends and how the workplace is evolving and how we can better understand people in those places and hear really how we can optimize the workplace.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. James Potton. Yeah, so I'm now doing, I guess, like AI implementation in organizations. It's kind of evolved from being a sort of business coach and advising companies on, how to try and create sort of streamline processes and thinking and like building like the vision and like values is just so important in my experience of scaling businesses. So yeah, and I've done a number of things in the past. I've run like tech boot camps, built like an energy platform, and the largest was an environmental consultancy that we took from 3 to 50 people and had 12 mil turnover. And so yeah, I mean, and being in the hot seat was just where I did all my learning.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, so Perry Tim. So I founded PTHR, as we call it, in 2012. So if James puts the technology in and Lisa's looking at the insight, we help with the design. So we look at all the moving parts of an organization and help them go from where they are to where they need to be in the future. So that has lots and lots of fun connotations and all sorts of interesting thoughts and processes. One of the things we stand for is creating environments where people flourish. So we call ourselves eudaimonia kind of consultants. So that's what we do at PTHR. Thank you.
And I heard you have a book coming out in August, is that right?
I do, yes. So it's my third book. On the 3rd of August, the HR operating model comes out. And who knew that was an interesting subject? But the HR operating model that we know and perhaps don't even love anymore has been around since the 1990s. So I'm trying to get a 2020s into 2050 version of that out into the world. Thank you for mentioning it, John.
Well, I've also been along that long, and I hope you don't try to update me. Maybe I'll be the subject of your next book, who knows? So today we're here to talk about productivity, which is such just a hot term, I think, in the industry. It was something that came up a lot. We were just at CMPD Festival of Work not too long ago, and it was definitely one of those things that I think was really kind of center stage for folks, especially as folks kind of start thinking about how they can get more with the resources they have, and maybe headcount is not necessarily always the answer to problems, but also just the AI boom and how that's impacting really how productivity is changing the way that we work even in our day to day. At Employment Hero, we're all about making kind of I guess work easier, more valuable for everyone, and that includes ways that businesses can get more from the resources that they have, but also be more productive. So we really launched this research, this Work That Works productivity report, to get under the hood of productivity and try to answer this kind of like I guess like long-standing productivity puzzle, if you will, that seems to have been plaguing the UK for, I guess, in my own, not to editorialize, but my own opinion, far too long at this point. So that's really what we wanted to do, and with the aim of helping SMEs understand their challenges and really with the intention of helping. So I wanted to give a little bit of background on kind of productivity and the productivity gap, and this productivity puzzle, so we can unpack that a little bit for the audience, but also just as context for the broader conversation. The national situation in productivity kind of globally is actually this economic measure of kind of GDP generated by hours of work or labor. I think that there's sometimes a disconnect personally between that metric and actually what we feel on the ground day to day in our businesses. I think we tend to see the narrative that's quite negative in the media of the UK is in this, productivity is locked down, productivity is declining. And that's really been the case from an economic perspective since 2008 and the financial crisis. The productivity puzzle is effectively the fact that while all other economic measures seem to be kind of going up into the right or generally in the right direction, productivity in the UK has really largely stagnated. And what you'll see is that we're actually fourth in the G7, probably closer to Italy than we are France, if we're being totally transparent with the data here as far as our overall economic productivity as a country. But we see when we get down to the SME factor that is actually like even amplified further. SMEs struggle with productivity as the economic metric, even more so than large companies, and things like access to the right tools, people, capital, investment, innovation, technology, all of those things just widen this gap and can make it significantly more difficult for SMEs to thrive in this market and kind of with some of these economic headwinds that they might be facing. So the way that we're measuring it, like globally, hasn't necessarily changed, but really work is completely different and fundamentally different. And that's what we want to kind of tackle with this. So what we have done today and kind of looking at this timeline of productivity in the UK, like we're at this present place of we've had kind of all of these developments, we've called it the productivity puzzle. It's really become embedded in this discussion since like 2013 or so. We've had the COVID pandemic sweep the economy. We're now in this present place where we are still yet to crack this thing, and that's really kind of what we're here to do today, and with this research and to really unpack it so SMEs can lean into the things that are accelerating their productivity, but also actually unpick and unpack the things that are maybe holding them back. So with that, I kind of wanted to turn it over to you, James and Perry. Like, we're finding that our research says that 1 in 3 SMEs are in this place where they're effectively like in survival mode, or pretty close to it. So just would love to know from your experience as people who both work really closely with SMEs in the UK, What's your take on this? Like, what do you think the biggest challenge that SMEs are facing right now? Let's start with
Shall I
you, James. Yeah.
go?
So yeah, well, look, I mean, it's the challenging bit is like squeeze margins, and in my experience, like you've got the cost of living and just cost of everything going up, and so as owner operators, it's becoming much harder to if you like reinvest into the business, and the same's happening for the owner operator themselves. So they probably set out to have their own business, to have a certain like lifestyle. That isn't always what happens, because they end up doing more and more work, and not having the free time, and they're not on the golf course as much as they would have liked. But they also wanted a certain lifestyle, and so they can end up drawing quite a bit out of the business themselves that maybe needs to be reinvested. So it's really tricky. This not quite zombie company, but some in a scenario where it's just about able to wash its own face with all the demands, but that doesn't solve, that doesn't future-proof a business. It just means that it just about keeps going.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, being an SME, I'm feeling that that James has described. It feels like you have to work harder to get to the same point. So there's something about the amount of effort you put in. But interestingly, if I go back to your statistics, when you look at the higher productivity countries, so let's take the US out of the equation and look at near neighbors, France and Germany, they're still very strong making countries. They produce a lot still, and they also have incredibly strong worker voice in their worker councils and union representation. So, I mean, maybe there's something there. The UK economy has been kind of knowledge for quite some time, and that doesn't seem to sort of make the same things that we see in those other two. So, to me, that tells me that the puzzle and the equation is kind of wrong. It's a bit industrial era. It still favours making, when actually the UK is really strong on things like creativity and the arts and humanities and so on, and education. So there's some interesting comparisons there. But I work with a lot of larger companies. They're not immune to this. They are struggling as much as smaller companies. They just maybe don't look like they are quite so much. But they've got complexity, size, and scale that they're trying to adapt and change. SMEs have got nimbleness, closeness to the market, and a real sense of everybody in it together. So I think we might be under leveraging and under measuring the strengths that SMEs have, which is why there is a kind of a puzzling thing about what productivity means to an SME. I'll give you one tiny example. A printing company in Cambridgeshire, small enough that they could make rapid change, decided that their best model wasn't to try and replicate large companies and have divisions, but to create groups of people who looked after client end to end, from concept to logistics and supply, and it did change their productivity equation. So that's the benefit of SMEs. We can change more quickly and sense the market, but of course the big companies are highly capitalized and they can just keep throwing money at it. So that's my view on that.
It's interesting that you call out making and manufacturing, because actually the industry where the kind of the large versus small productivity gap is widest, and that second stat of the 50% gap is actually manufacturing. And a lot of that has to do with, I think, the access technology and tools and things like that actually accelerate productivity. But I love the idea that through some almost kind of like Henry Ford-esque operational efficiencies and changes, you can still see some of those productivity gains at a even regardless of the size of your business. So if you remember, I was telling you, as folks joined the call, if you could think about your own business's productivity, we're going to actually launch a poll. So it should be popping up any moment for you now, but we want you to think about your own business's productivity. And do you think over the last decade, or sorry, increased or decreased over the last year, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being your productivity has decreased and 5 being your productivity has increased by quite a lot? So a poll should have popped up. So if you just pop your responses in there.
We can't vote, James, but would you say your productivity has increased a lot, a little, same, or what would you say about yours?
I was just thinking that, well, yeah, since the AI kind of journey, what you do now, like than 6 months ago, is incredible. And it's, I did a deep dive into it in 2023, and I could see it where it was going, but it wasn't quite there, and now it really is. So how about yourself?
Yeah, I think we've increased productivity. I think we've also strengthened impact, but it's just such a tricky market to read and get in. It's almost like I'm getting clients who need a lot more help to get there. So we're having to put in a lot more. So we are still efficient, but in different ways because there's more to do.
Yeah, and James, I did feel a little maybe personal narrative in your answer there. Your time on the golf course over the past year, has that increased or
I play more paddle than golf, so
Oh, nice.
yeah. I've got a young kid, so the answer is no. But I'm getting headspace to play it, of an evening. So, but I actually really enjoy my work, so I tend to
No, that's great. No,
chat in the golf.
I'm the same way. I would say I would probably answer the question the same way. I'm like, it's not a maybe a correlated factor. It's actually just more so by choice. I'm like, I really enjoy I'm sure
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
enjoy other things instead of.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Amazing. So it looks like we've had most folks vote. I'm actually probably going to turn it over to Lisa to help us interpret the data as our head of insights.
Mm.
Oh, a big spread there across.
Mm.
So the insight from our survey was that 7 in 10 businesses reported that they think their productivity as a company has increased over the last 12 months. So there's a little bit less here. What do we have there? Like 40, 50% increase. Paul stayed the same. So we found the same. And actually, it's important to think about productivity on a spectrum or a scale. There's not this kind of binary, you're productive, not productive. There's this sort of lot of in between. And we found that, people answered that on a 1 to 10 scale, a 0 to 10 scale. So yeah, it's interesting, a spread.
Great. So you want to walk us through the kind of what else?
Yeah. So, as John said at the beginning, what we wanted to do here was really understand productivity, not from a macroeconomic perspective, but on the ground at the reality of what's happening in small businesses across the country. We wanted to identify what's holding them back. So, we've called these the drains, and then also shine a light on what's actually driving productivity. And these are the gains that we'll come on to. So, a quick note on how we did this. This was a large scale survey that we undertook back in March, and we tested a huge range of factors that drive productivity. And we did correlation analyses, other statistical techniques to really understand what matters and really pull out the things that make a difference to how productive a company can be. So we wanted to gain perspectives from business leaders, but also employees. That two-sided kind of coin was really important. Normally, productivity is measured and reported from a very macro business level perspective, but actually what's happening with employees is important to understand. So we had a representative sample of both. We looked at companies of under 1,000 people and really wanted to look at how that segments by business size, because that's a real differentiating factor for how productive businesses can be. So these are our 3 productivity drains. We have tech culture clash, inefficiency, price of perception, and recruitment burden of staffing. So we'll go into each of these, just a few highlights per theme. First up, we have tech, the culture clash. And here, tech is hard to keep up with. We found that only half of SMEs think they've done a good job of being able to kind of keep up with tech innovation. And in the survey, we had a verbatim question where we asked business leaders, in your own words, what do you think is your biggest challenge? So we're just sort of going to pass it over to them, and a couple of the answers that go on the slide now. And interestingly, of all the things they could have said, AI was the most cited term in that verbatim question. So it's very top of mind, and clearly it's something that people are thinking about. And we found that 80% of people, business leaders, agree that implementing AI is a challenge. And this disconnect is actually very stark between leaders and employees. So we asked leaders and employees, obviously separately, what they think drives productivity. So thinking about them to be objective there. And twice as many leaders selected tech as employees. And this chart really sums up what's happening with employees, to be honest. It's just they don't see the importance of tech, so relative to other things. And you'll see that all the tech factors, the tech innovation, automation, AI, all rank at the bottom of the list for employees. And given tech feels like such an obvious or tangible driver of productivity, this was really surprising for us that all these things just ranked so low for employees. But having a quick look at the top, sorry, John, you'll see much more human-centric factors there, and we'll come on to those in a bit because they're important too, but they're kind of where the gains sit. So tech is more than just tech. It's not about implementation and just an implementation piece. It comes down to having a culture that's ready for that to succeed. And people, at the very least, need to see the value and its place in their company. And they need to be more aligned to leaders conceptually on what it's going to do for them. And then the next theme, the next drain we had is inefficiency, price of perception. And perception is the really important word there. So a third of employees feel that they spend time on inefficient or unnecessary tasks. And when they feel like that, it directly impacts kind of deeper emotions and their connection to their job. So those that perceive a higher level of inefficiency in their job or in their company are much less likely to feel that they enjoy their work or that their work is meaningful or even to feel valued. And those drops are significant. So how they think about inefficiency in the company really has an impact on everything that they're doing, and they're sort of a much wider piece than just the task itself. So what does that inefficiency look like? We found that tasks related to employment are a huge time suck. And this is where a lot of inefficiencies lie in companies, often with heritage systems or processes that have been in place for a long, long time. And as they've grown, they become even harder to manage. So a whole day lost to employment admin a week, and even a small proportion spending 15 or more hours a week, like a huge amount of time kind of lost to that admin, which doesn't need to be as much of a time suck. So these experiences of work aren't just something to accept and live with. This perception that employees have really shapes productivity and business outcomes as a result of that. And focusing on how people feel is crucial. It's not just about the tasks or the processes themselves, but how the employees are internalizing that and what they think about it and how it's affecting their day-to-day. And then the final drain is recruitment. So this kind of burden of staffing that I think most people can relate to. So acquiring staff is tough. The process can be inefficient. It can be, difficult to manage. It can be slow. And our analysis found that when business leaders feel that the efficiency of their recruitment is poor or inefficient, it really impacts how productive they are as an organization. So on this chart, these lines kind of mirror each other. So as recruitment is inefficient, so that's the left of the line, the orange left, inefficiency is at its worst. Productivity is low, like close to zero. There's just those things are polar opposites. But as inefficiency goes away, so to the right of the graph on the orange, productivity will go up. So those metrics are absolutely working in lockstep with each other. And they, one impacts the other. You can't have a productive company with inefficient processes of recruitment because they just don't work together. So when it comes to hiring, tech is a game changer. And companies that have good tech and feel they have good tech that can help them in that process are much more likely to report that recruitment is not a serious challenge for them. So it's a sort of causal impact here, good tech, and it takes away the challenges of recruitment to a large extent. But interestingly, we found that a lot of companies are spending more these days on recruitment and hiring. So it isn't that they've found efficient ways or ways to kind of manage that spend and do it better. They're just throwing lots more money at the problem. And, there's lots of potential wastage there with hiring, and only a small proportion are spending less. So it's an important area to think about how tech can play a part there. And smaller companies are struggling even more so. So we found that those companies of under 250 people say that acquiring staff is harder for them, and they're more likely to agree that recruitment is a big challenge than their larger counterparts, those over 250. So it's even more acute at that smaller end of very small businesses, and there's a huge long tail of those people and those companies where they're finding it really hard to recruit and do that efficiently. So we think that recruitment shouldn't live in a silo, and often it does. It kind of happens outside of everything else, and it's not sort of connected to the rest of the company. And it's all too often just accepted to be clunky or inefficient and difficult. But actually, innovation needs to apply here too. So it's clear from our data that the state of the recruitment process directly shapes how productive the whole company can be and how everyone feels in the company when they've got a great system with bringing new people in.
Amazing. So let's ask our experts, Perry, James, some questions. So James, starting with you, you work really closely with small businesses. Like obviously, quite a few drains here. Some of them are definitely like big ticket items, I guess you will. Like, do you think there are any additional hidden inefficiencies that you're observing?
Yeah, I mean, like really interesting to see the report. It's yeah, I mean, obviously, like how people feel is so important in an organization. Do they feel like they're respected? Do they feel like they're valued? I personally think, if you sort of take money off the table, the reason people, go to work is for growth and contribution. So if those two are dropping away, then it's a real problem. And if neither are there, then that's where you get people basically leaving or sitting in the seat, but mentally having left, which is even worse. So yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to a lot of the time like leadership style and the way in which in my view, great leaders create more leaders. So it's about understanding what understanding how to do something and then handing it to someone else and then kind of trying to make yourself redundant all the time, and that isn't always the case in the sort of 5 to 50 size businesses. The founder or senior leadership team can often, everything goes through them, like the bottleneck is at the top of the bottle, right? And it's a real problem. My experience tells me, and I even did it in my own business when we were scaling from like 25 to 50. We implemented OKRs, and it was game changer. But the platform we used and the way we did it, as MD, I was brought into that journey, and they even fed back after the way we implemented it and the way we were committed to it, and the way we created champions and subject matter experts within the team was really powerful. But that isn't but that doesn't always happen. So you often see that the knowledge and all the sales and so on go through that sort of senior leadership at the top of the business. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest inefficiencies. I also think things like meetings, like the founder CEOs or whatever, like kind of use the meeting to do their thinking, but they're like paying for all those people to sit on those seats, and it's a bit like, well, how do we sort of change the way meetings are? Um, what are meetings for? What is this meeting? Like, a really good example when I've seen holacracy kind of model like implemented was, this is a what meeting, right? We only talk about what has happened or what hasn't happened. We're not talking about why it hasn't happened. That can be outside of the room, but we're not wasting everyone else's time. And this is about how we value our team's time. If our team don't feel like their time's valued, then that's the productivity drops off because their engagement's going to drop away. So I think that they're some of the key things. It's around like the style, the setting out a culture, setting out the values, and also creating an environment where you kind of create mini businesses within the business, so people feel like they've got agency within their role, and that is so often that isn't the case, and that I think that kills productivity.
Yeah, so it sounds like, almost to play some of that back, it sounds like there's just like process debt, and maybe people aren't critical enough of like the why behind they do, or why behind why they are doing some of the things that they're doing, and being a little bit more intentional with that, and actually really trying to respect the time of the people in the organization, and that starts from the top down culture and leadership. I also think what you said at the beginning about kind of taking money off the table, like, and why are people showing up to work every day, was a bit of a I don't know. I think Lisa might be talking about that a little bit later potentially, but a kind of a nod to something that was picked up in the report. Um, Perry, like you work with leaders
Mm.
across businesses of many sizes. Like, really curious to
Hmm.
see, kind of from
Mm.
your perspective, like how are leaders
Yeah.
how are you helping leaders tackle these inefficiencies?
Yeah.
And if there's anything in what James said that like resonated with you.
So I can come at it from being an SME and then also taking my SME head into these larger organizations. They are, again, are not immune to it. They can hide it because they've got much more resource and they've got much more capital. And so they're probably less pressed on some of this because they don't feel it more acutely. But James hit on some really important stuff, and I'm going to kind of call them out a bit. That you have a modality as an organization at an SME level. If you're growing and you're a new SME, you're in emergence. So your modality is that you're kind of constantly tuning and you're making things up as you go along. And you probably need lots of heads in your processes and you're establishing them, dropping them and replacing them quite quickly because that's what you do and you're in emergence. If you're an established SME, you're probably into excelling because you just want to get better at stuff and sharper at stuff and smarter than stuff. Different tempo, different form of control, different form of participation. And if you're an SME under pressure, then you've got to be in exploring mode because you're like, how do I get out of this pressure? How do I move into an adjacent market or a different product or serve a different client or create some different proposition? So you do need different things. And what I think we don't need is all the processes being all the same throughout those modalities. You've got to tune them, continuously update them, drop them, be brutal with them. Like James said about meetings. So we're 7 people fully remote. We barely have 1 meeting a week where we're together, but we are so plugged in because we work out loud. We've created different ways that we know what we're doing. We know how to make decisions. So we tune it to our modality, to our culture. And even though we're remote, I think we've got the strongest culture of any organization I've ever seen. So definitely something in you be very deliberate about it and very contextual to who you are. And when I go into most companies that are larger adopting tech, they are either 2050 pioneering using agentic AI, or they might as well be in 1997. So this is not just an SME technology wrangle. The big companies are still plundering along with this sense of technology nowhere near unleashing potential. So don't think that because you're an SME you haven't got the tech resource to do it. You've probably got more chance to be experimental within your modality and buy whatever tech you want because you're not subject to huge procurement constraints. So I think there's a lot you can do, but you've got to make it a thing that you are bothered about, continually purge inefficiency and strive for creative, positive, purposeful stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I like the reframe of like size actually as a superpower as opposed to something that is holding businesses back. Is like it can be so hard to get businesses to adopt new things, and well, it might say, oh well, just because you signed on the dotted line for a new tech doesn't mean that rollout in a big organization is easy. I know that's the case in small organizations as well, but that speed to adoption and even using some of the tools that are available to them is such a leverage point. I guess to that point, James, like with only half of SMEs saying that they've indicated, or in our report indicated that they're keeping up with tech advances, like how do you think a small business goes about creating a tech forward or tech, I guess like tech empowered, tech hungry culture?
Yeah, it's I mean, I was gonna start with like an example that I've seen that like is really powerful. So one of the companies I work with, they've grown quite quickly over the last few years. So they've gone from like 50 to 300 people. So they're a little bit larger, but I still think the model that they're using like is still applicable. So they've kind of created like a skunk works or a team that meet over like, sort of lunch and learn style. And they are all sort of using AI in different ways in different parts of the business and learning at different rates. But this organization has embraced AI, but they've also created sort of AI policy and said what they can and can't do. And I think I think people are going to use AI whether you like it or not. And the risk there is that that people are sending data over to America in the good in good situation. Sometimes if they don't realize if they're using DeepSeek, that's all going over to China. So they could be releasing like confidential IP or company documentation. If the company leans into it, like pays for AI software, like there's tick boxes, there's ways to avoid that scenario. But burying their head in the sand is like not going to help either, like cross-fertilization of knowledge in the organization, and it's not going to you're at risk of actually like doing the one thing that people fear, which is feeding the machine. So I think that kind of creating a culture where people can get together, share knowledge, you start to get sort of champions that emerge within the organization. And yeah, I mean, it's that, you know, there's then the point of you can use like third parties and external, and it depends on like the complexity. But yeah, like a lot of the time when you ask a company if they're using AI, they say yes, but what they're actually effectively using is ChatGPT. But that is quite different to you know, an agentic worker that sits in the background, that's trained on your data, and is you know, something that the way I see it, you know, an individual can do like one SOP. Sorry, individual does 5 SOPs in an organization normally. Like an AI, like agentic worker can sit over one SOP, but it might be like we talk about emancipation from drudgery. We're trying to help that individual take away 50% of your rubbish work, so you can do, you know, all of your like time is spent on like valuable work and, you know, working with your customer. And so that I think is kind of key. It's how do you make it clear that you want to go on an AI journey with your team, and that you know, you'll support them in kind of cross-fertilizing within the organization.
So it sounds like, to play that back a little bit. So it sounds like, one, like create spaces where AI is celebrated and discussed and actually like championed within the business. But then also as a business, you probably need to have some sort of governance over that, and like maybe a policy around it would probably be savvy as far as like data and what can kind of be fed into AIs. And then maybe the third bit that you touched on there is you know, like with maybe within that celebration and kind of that space that you celebrating like actual transformational uses of it, maybe not necessarily like only surface level uses of it, where it's very individualized as opposed to scaled and having a wider business impact. So really thinking about that throughout the entire business and not just on a kind of individual like level.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wanted to also shout, so I've obviously been asking the three of you questions, which is great, but the audience is also able to ask you questions here at the end of the session today. And I just wanted to call out that the way that folks can ask questions is through the Q&A feature. So you should have on your sidebar the ability to ask questions via the questions and answers feature. You can also drop them into the chat. We will see them both ways, but the Q&A feature is preferred, so we can just keep track of what we're answering. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to drop them in. But with that, I think like we will certainly be talking about recruitment at the end. I think I've seen a couple of questions about that. So Perry, put your thinking cap on for that one, because I think that's going to come to you.
Nice. Yep.
But Lisa, I would love if we could get into the gains around productivity.
Yeah, so we have 3 gains: satisfaction, meaning over hours, and that's a nod to right at the start. If you remember that John talked about the fact that the input for the macroeconomic measure is hours in. And of course, we should all think that there's way more as inputs than just hours. Recognition, power of being seen, and AI automation's purpose. So first up, the satisfaction gain. For employees, job satisfaction trumps everything else in driving personal productivity. So no amount of tools or tech or systems, processes, of course, all those are crucial and, you know, vital for their jobs, but none of it sits above how someone feels about the work that they do. And so productivity and job satisfaction move together in near perfect correlation. So, you know, it's a no-brainer that those things should go together. It feels intuitive, but the data shows that. And it goes beyond just a personal feeling. So we found that those who have high satisfaction with their jobs are more likely to feel committed to the company that they're in, and they're more motivated. So it's the gains are bigger than just a personal feeling of, oh, I feel good about what I do. And then employees will sometimes go over and above. And what makes them do that? So first and foremost, it's because they care about the work. If it feels meaningful to them, that's what drives over and above kind of attitude. And highly satisfied employees are actually less driven by cash rewards or monetary incentives or even promotion goals and potential. It's really about caring about what they're doing. And they're more likely to help people in their company too. So it sort of extends beyond themselves, makes them more collaborative as people. So we think the power of job satisfaction is clear, but it's actually not high on the agenda for most business leaders and most companies. You know, they're aware of it, it's there, but it's not a huge focus area. It might feel like something that they don't focus on or shouldn't focus on, or that they wouldn't have much impact on. Perhaps there's a sense that they can't influence that feeling or mold job satisfaction, but there are ways and means to drive that up if you kind of are deliberate about it and intentional. But right now, job satisfaction as a driver of productivity ranks 7th for those large organizations and 9th for smaller ones. So, there's definitely room for that to improve and to be more front and center for business leaders. And then the second gain is recognition. So it's sort of a progression from satisfaction, really. It's a sort of kind of sits within satisfaction to a large extent, but people need to feel like they matter. It's a fundamental human need. We need to feel like we are meaningful to someone else, that we're seen and valued, that what we're doing has purpose and impact. And that obviously sits, at the center of everything we do as humans in and outside of work. But it's important in work to not just be transactional about how you go about it. And when businesses have a great culture of recognition, we find that they're much less likely to have retention problems. And that difference is significant, so 40% less likely. And then when people feel recognized, they go over and above. But recognition actually sits really low for business leaders. It's 19th out of 20th when we rank all those productivity drivers. And so it's just not something that business leaders are thinking about. It's probably right now a big missed opportunity for people, because so many people don't feel recognized in their companies. So it's not like they do already and it doesn't need to be addressed. People don't feel recognized, and business leaders aren't prioritizing it either. But when you feel like you're valued or you're seen with that sort of intentional recognition from leaders above, next slide, John, thanks. It doesn't just make that person feel good, it actually makes that person sit at the upper end of productivity. So it pushes them along that scale. As I mentioned earlier, it's not sort of this binary on-off process. It actually moves someone into a better position in how productive that they can be. And then the final gain is AI automation to purpose. And this is, a saturated topic, but it's really about what it's bringing to employees beyond just the obvious things around automation. So we asked business leaders if they thought their productivity had increased or decreased, as we asked you all in a poll earlier. And the number one reason that business leaders cite that increase, if it has increased for them, is tech advancements. And that's AI, first and foremost. So it's driving actually a positive feeling among employees. Like I said, tangible reasons aside and all the automation aside, it's actually making people feel like they have more impact in their job. So it's not just a time saver or shaving off hours. They feel like they're better at their job, or that they're doing a better job, they're having more impact, and therefore it's driving up how they feel, their satisfaction. So these things kind of go hand in hand and don't just sit, completely in isolation. And then looking into that a bit more deeply, so there are a bunch of positive effects that AI can have on someone at work. And what I found interesting here was that it really wasn't first and foremost about all about hours, but actually better quality of work, being more creative at work, ranked really highly on that list of effects. But the interesting thing we found here is that the harnessing of AI for work is really disparate across companies, and that is definitely an age thing. We see that in age and we see it in industry. But what was interesting here is that slightly more senior staff are more likely to use AI in their jobs than entry level. And there's probably a whole kind of list of reasons to why that's the case, but it's definitely not democratized in the workplace at the moment. And then we see that SMEs, once again, are less likely to benefit from that gain. So they're more, so less likely to have invested in AI already. So they're on the back foot a little bit more, and they're less likely to prioritize it for the coming 12 months. So there's definitely work to do to get those leaders into a sort of more AI-centric place. So finally, it's high on the agenda for business leaders. We can see that, but they need to bring employees along that journey. And it's certainly not about human versus tech, and that might be hanging around a bit, but we hope that will go away very soon. But it's focusing on the purpose that AI can bring, and overcoming any fears that employees have, and just making them feel like it's an enhancement and not something that they should be afraid of if they're not tech savvy at the moment, or they think it might take their job away.
So this is maybe a bit of a loaded question for both of you, Perry and James, but recognition and job satisfaction are such big drivers of productivity. Like, why do you think there is such a stark gap for business leaders and that, I guess, insight, like, and really driving a culture of job satisfaction?
I'll let you go first, Perry.
Thank you. Right. I'll take a large organization perspective again, because that's my client base. They worry more about this because of the distance between leadership and people who are kind of serving customers and delivering directly to them, right? So they are really bothered about this, because there's some statistics that will tell you that if that's the case and people feel like they get recognition and appreciation, they are absolutely purring through your bottom line and creating much more value. So they're worried about it from the distance point of view. So I do wonder, and I don't have any empirical evidence for this, whether leaders in SMEs just think because they're closer, they don't have to. Because it's almost like, yeah, we just get on with it, don't we? It's like, no. People still need to know that they're valued, make a difference, they're recognized, especially from you if you're the founder or if you're the CEO of it. So don't think that it's a tokenistic gesture, because it isn't. It means a lot to people that their leader recognizes what they do. So maybe we think in SMEs, just because we're closer to it, we don't have to do it. But I think we do. Be very deliberate and very sincere and very regular about it.
And I actually want to jump in there because I think Lisa, there were some insights in the report that aren't included in this that actually talk about how SMEs rate themselves on a culture of recognition. Is that right? And I think you had some hypotheses around maybe why that would be, that actually kind of maybe marry up with Perry's.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right, Perry. I think there's not an intentional
Yeah.
sort of strategy with it. I think that's why it
Mm,
ranks so low on that list
mm,
of factors, because it doesn't feel like something that is a tangible or
mm,
obvious driver of
mm,
productivity. Those two things feel quite far apart.
mm,
Um, but I think taking a more human-centric approach with productivity, that actually becomes, like crucial in that process. Um, and yeah, we I think we found that too, that SMEs don't think that they're doing a great job of it. Like lots of leaders actually acknowledge that it's not a huge sort of success point for them, but because they don't
mm,
think it's that important, that's why it's
Mm.
not sort of been prioritized enough at the moment.
mm.
Yeah. So James, what do you think about on the smaller side of things?
Yeah, I guess, well, look, I mean, the three most important words in leadership are thank you and please, right? So but it's so often overlooked. I think, in the hot seat, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of people are just, kind of, I say working on the edge, they're kind of like, so when they're in these leadership roles, they just need something done. They don't spend the time necessarily to um, explain around like why something needs to be done. So it's this kind of, so it's this sort of, I suppose the speed of having to get things done that means that all the niceties go out the window. I guess it's more like a WhatsApp versus an email. Like you don't put your name at the end and stuff, so you're forgetting to say thanks there. So that I think that I mean that is real. I think like especially in smaller startups, the founder can't understand why everyone else isn't motivated in the same way as them. So they
Yeah.
sort of sit in this bubble and just don't understand like the disconnect of what it's actually like to be working within the business rather than in their role. And I'd probably throw in that I've worked in almost like the opposite culture. So, it was a different like platform, but it had the weekly shout outs and, with a North American like HQ, and it almost felt like forced, and it's almost has the opposite
Mm.
effect. So we've got to be, it has to be genuine, I think is like the key point. Like it's a genuine gratitude. And yeah, I think it's tough because there's this whole concept of sharing everything. So people want to know what happened in the boardroom, for example. Like the team want to know, but actually, do they really want to know? Because it can sometimes create such a distraction. And I've seen it actually like have the opposite effect by being completely open. But yeah, the founders and senior leadership team are sometimes dealing with stuff that the rest of the team probably doesn't help the rest of the team to also be worrying about the same things that they're worrying about, but they've got a pressure like no pressure before, and they're also probably possibly doing it for the first time in their journey, and if they are that it's the the crucible is just grinding there. So yeah, they don't necessarily find the time to say thank you, but it affects the team in a big way.
Yeah, so folks can, just as a reminder, you can drop questions into the Q&A chat. We have a few that have been submitted already, but I'm gonna ask a couple of them here. So just probably one for you, Perry. Like, what does it
Mhm.
actually look like for an SME to build a like meaningful culture around recognition?
Mm. So I'll give you a couple of examples of tech companies I've seen who've done this. So peer-to-peer recognition is something that starts a chain reaction, right? So it doesn't just have to come from up top. So whether it's people who spend lots of time in vehicles together, and so they're hanging out and doing stuff, and they appreciate what each other does and have a kind of download at the end of the day to say, when you dealt with that client, really helped me, bailed me out with the stats, whatever it is. So normalizing that is really good. And then I think to James's point, there's something about leaders who keep all their stuff in their heads and just kind of get on with the busyness. So I saw a tech company where the board and the CEO particularly had a scrum board outside their office, so they would write down what they're up to, what their sprints are like, what their pressures are, and so on. And people would just walk by and go, wow, they've got a really important meeting with the investors. I wonder what that's about. So what would they do? They would actually ask them, how did that meeting go? What do we need to know? So there's something about a two-way thing going on here. Now, leaders will probably say they don't get much appreciation either, which is probably why it ranks really low on their thinking about it, because they don't get it. But believe me, as a founder, you want to know you're doing the right things. So you want people to tell you when you're messing it up, when you're doing it really well, when you're holding a safe space for them, being really clear with the decision making. So this stuff costs nothing, because all you do is regularize, normalize, and make it really sincere and effective and useful. But that starts with making it a habit. So make it a habit. Don't bring in perks and the kind of stuff that the jazz hands that James talked about. Sincere, helpful, reflective, appreciative feedback goes a long, long way, especially when you're in crisis and you need everybody to get behind something. Guess what? They will. They won't even ask. They'll just go, right, because we're so open, you need me to do that now. I'm dropping everything I'm doing and I'm getting on to that. So that's the kind of culture it creates. Conversations, feedback, smallest unit of change. Just keep it going like that.
Yeah, 100%. And it looks like we have a hand raised. I don't know, Milena, if we're able to address that question there, or Victoria, if for some reason that's not working for you, if you could just drop your question into the chat, we can address it there. I guess in the meantime, I guess one for you, James, to kind of build that up as somebody who's the head of a business focused on AI. How are you finding what actually adopting AI looks like when it's being deployed in a business?
Yeah, so like it's a it's a bit like trying to understand where you are and where you could be. So this kind of gap analysis is really important, I think, up front. And obviously, like in that process, you sort of need to understand what where you could be or what's out there. And the gains that can be made are quite like rapid, but you know effectively, as you kind of would with any like planning within an organization, you should sort of look at, okay, how much is this going to save this? What's the potential like uplift in revenue? And you know what's the cost of like implementation, and you get like an ROI out of that. So yeah, like that kind of audit in the beginning, like when we work with companies, like the reality is that we say it's like 50-50. We arrive with what can happen, they arrive with what currently is happening. And there's like this massive like interchange of like knowledge, because we're trying to understand like the processes, what's happening, and they're trying to understand, oh wow, so you can do that now. So I think that's the really powerful bit. And then you prioritize, and you know, never try and eat the elephant whole. There's loads and loads of examples of AI being implemented in a way where it never really delivers like what was promised. And I think that's when you try and do too much with it. And I go back to just try and fix like one standard operating procedure, one process, and embed something, you know, like transcription technology is an example. There's so much information that's like lost if you don't have that on your like sales calls, because over time that can be teaching the AI. So when you get new people in, that you don't have to create like a sales script. You can say, hey, you know, what is our sales process? And it is really good at drawing out. You know, we've had transcription technology for ages, but AI and you know generative AI is really good at understanding like context in like lots of words. And I go further than that. That should also be in like meeting rooms. It should be in you know, some sales processes are year long. Who can remember, like the legal team in large organizations, like get to the end and need to understand everything that's been said before. Well, now they can, because so I think that there's some really big quick wins, and yeah, I really like the sort of more agile sort of sprint concept of each month let's try and like implement one shift, and we do as much as 80% of the gain, you know, and that's 20% of the effort, and we all know that the last 20% is 80%. So let's get the gain, get it in people's hands, and then you can work out how they actually use it and what that then means, if you wanted to then tweak what you've implemented in that period.
So it sounds like it's kind of like a incremental test, deploy, kind of test, learn, and then feedback, and then have this kind of virtuous cycle. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna push y'all. Let's get down to the brass tacks. Like, what tools do you think are really helping SMEs right now? Or if you could recommend something for the folks on this call, knowing it's SME leaders, it's HR professionals, like what are the tools that you think actually could make a big difference in their business, or you'd kind of recommend as a first place to start?
Good one.
I'll let you go, Perry, first.
Well, apart from Employment Hero, of course, because all that
Okay.
HR and people administration, you need to have a system that can handle that, right? So there are so many agentic and generative AI solutions out there in recruitment now. You can find them just by doing some quick searching, but there are things where you can say, look, I need one of these, but I don't have the right kind of job description for it. Can you help me build it? And bang, it will do it. So I mean, off the top of my head, I can't even think. There's so many. Literally, all I can see is a mush of logos. But start using these things in trials and tests and so on to take some of the brunt out of the recruitment challenges that you've got. You can even get an AI thing to do your interviewing for you these days. Talk to Sam.ai is one I'll recommend. You can get the bot to do your interviewing, so you don't even have to slot time in. You can get filtered through that. So yeah, it's a play field. But as James said, I think you just got to do this iteratively and kind of focus on what's going to give you business gains.
Yeah, for me, I mentioned it earlier, but I think transcription and with connected with you know, a generative AI agent, or a way of like then using that information is so powerful. And you know, because you ask people what's your sales process, and they, you know, they don't know, they don't like necessarily, they just naturally sort of sell. But actually there will be things that they ask, there will be like drawing out like the pain point and understanding the journey that the person that they're speaking to is, like where they're at, where they need to be, and then, you know, does our product sort of feel in the middle? And you know, AI understands like different sales models. So if you kind of build out and say we use, you know, Bant or, you know, Champ or Medpic or whatever, you can say what we would like to use, and it understands that. So I think that's, you know, for knowledge transfer, I think the thing that we, you know, goes back to meetings being such a waste of time if we don't take, you know, actions and so on out of them. But transcription actually means that that's naturally happening, because it can pull out like the tasks and who said what, and you know.
Yeah, that's hugely important. So I'm conscious we have a couple minutes left here, so I want to make sure that folks have kind of key action items here, and then also the ability to access the report. But really, I think just to kind of wrap up, kind of bring all the thoughts together here. I think it's clear just from this conversation, but also this research and looking at this kind of larger productivity puzzle, like the notion of productivity has evolved in tandem with the way that we work. It just has maybe not reflected in the statistics that we're using to measure it. I think for businesses of all sizes, we have so much opportunity to be able to not just, you know, put in more hours as maybe the conventional measures would suggest to drive more output, but really just work smarter and actually get more out of the output that you know, like through efficiencies, be that through the drains, or so through busting the drains that Lisa highlighted, or through for capitalizing on the gains that she's highlighted. And these don't necessarily need to be expensive and complicated fixes. I think some of it is, and actually what we've learned a lot of is it's a lot of it's cultural. A lot of it is like the things that you invest in that are in your business that might not matter to, you know, as a leader, but your employee is clearly thinking out and investing the energy and the time in bridging that gap. But effectively, like this is meant to be a practical roadmap to kind of get you started on that journey. And it's probably not sensible, I think, to James and Perry, but what you both alluded to try to tackle all 6 of these things that we've highlighted at the same time, but to do it one at a time and figure out which one really is going to have the biggest impact on your business. So with that, I would invite everyone to grab their phone and scan the QR code. We can also send you the report after the fact, but this is not just a piece of research. I think it's more of a practical roadmap and guide for ways that you can slowly start turning the ship on productivity in your businesses, but also hopefully a bit of a fork in the road for the conversation that we've all been part of as a I guess businesses and an SME kind of pillar of this nation as a whole. So with that, huge thank you to everyone for joining today. Lisa for walking through the research. James, obviously you're super close to on the AI and SMEs front, and just like extremely valuable insight. And then Perry, of course, always a pleasure. And then your perspective across being an SME and also working with larger businesses, just super valuable. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Yay.